Hey guys, welcome back. It is January 1st, so I'm going to go ahead and do my 2025 reading wrap up, my best and worst of the year, my statistics, all of the things. First, I ended up reading 114 books. My Goodreads does say 115, but that's because I did log a Scooby-Doo book that me and the boys read together that they asked for me to put into my Goodreads along with our rating, which was 5 stars. From those 114 books, I read 40,034 pages. So I think Goodreads has that a little bit different as well. Even though the one book difference was not 10 pages, I don't know. It's not brain surgery. It doesn't have to be precise. So I read over 40,000 pages this year, which I am pretty excited about. And then looking at some graphs that I made, one of the things that I thought was interesting is I read a lot more new releases than I thought that I did. Looking at this graph, I read 16 2025 releases, and I read 22 2024 releases. The only other one that's close is 2023 with 15 books, and from there it goes down. Several of these years only read one book each. Moving into my favorite authors of the year, or I should say top read authors of the year. As you can see, Matt Denneman was the winner with 7 books. I did read the entire Dungeon Crawler Carl series that has so far been published. Behind that, I have a 3-way tie between Brandon Sanderson, Maggie Stiefvater, and T. Kingfisher. After that, I have a 3-way tie between Rebecca Yarros, Ronald Malfi, and then Debbie McCumber. My average rating was actually like a 4.1 if I round. The way that my ratings broke down, I had 1 star, 7 2 stars, 23 3 stars, 36 4 stars, and 47 5 stars. 4 stars is a pretty high average rating, and I think that is the case for a few reasons. First of all, I don't go into a book looking for the plot holes and the things that I can pick apart later. I don't think that your ratings of books are meant to be that serious or that deep. I am not a literary critique type person. Like, I'm reading books where one of the main characters is a cat, so it's not that serious. Another reason I think is I'm not picking up books that I think I'm going to give low ratings to. Not usually. I did on one of these, and it's going to be in my lowest books of the year, and I could pick up books that I don't think I'm going to like and have a lower average rating, but why would I do that? That doesn't make sense. Here are the breakdowns of the genres that I read. So 36 books were just fantasy or romantasy. I do put those two things together. Just for myself, I think it's easier to put those two together. YA I did separate because I would like to keep track of the books that I am reading that are intended for younger audiences. I will say though, out of the 20 YA books that I read this year, only one, I believe, was not fantasy. That does kind of put my fantasy reading at about half of the books that I read this year. After that, we have mystery. I read 14 of those. I read 25 romances. That number is bigger than normal this year because I did do that Christmas vlog where I was thrifting Christmas books. A lot of those ended up being romances. I read 2 thrillers, 7 horrors, 7 lit RPGs, 1 classic, and 2 just general fiction books. Let's go ahead and get into my top books of 2025 and my lowest books of 2025. So I'm going to do a top 10, but then I'm also going to do a 10 honorable mentions list as well. So first of all, my honorable mentions, these are kind of in order. I'm going to start with like number 20 and work my way back up to number 11. But I find it very, very difficult to rank things. First up is Kiki's Delivery Service. I read this for the first time this year, even though I have watched the movie before. I also rewatched the movie, which was very nostalgic. This is just a classic fantasy story. And it's kind of like when I read Howl's Moving Castle last year. When I read it for the first time, it felt like I was rereading a favorite already when I read it the first time. And I feel like that is such a hard thing to find in a book. But I thought that this was just a good, cozy fantasy read, and one that you could just return to year after year whenever you just want something familiar and cozy. Next up, I read Little Women. I cannot tell you how many times this book made me cry. And sometimes it was sad tears, sometimes it was happy tears. Like, it just was such a good, wholesome, heartwarming story. I loved all of the sisters, but Jo was my favorite. I don't know if it was because she was just a more rebellious spirit, or if it was because she was a writer, or what it was. She was my favorite. And I also really enjoyed the mother in here as well. Just the lessons that she teaches her girls, the fact that, when other people are saying that they should marry rich and raise their status because they are impoverished, and she's like, no, I want you to marry for love. I want you to have happy families, happy households. I want for you to be happy like I am. Even though we don't have a lot, I'm happy with you girls. And I thought that this was an amazing story. Next up is the Scorpio races. This is one that I read in my birthday vlog. And when I was going through and trying to pick my 10 honorable mentions, I'm looking at all of these 5-star books and I'm trying to think which ones have stuck with me and will stick with me. And I think that this is one of them. The concept of the water horses I thought was really interesting. Maggie Stiefvater's writing is just beautiful. She is going to appear on this list again. Like, as a aspiring writer, I want my writing to feel like Maggie Stiefvater's. I want my readers to feel like I feel when I read Maggie Stiefvater's writing. And I thought that this was an interesting story. I loved all of the characters. It was such a quick read because I couldn't get enough of this story. Next up is the Saga of the Unfated. And I put the two of them together because this is a continuous story. It's not like, following two different characters. It is one continuous story. And that is another reason that I think I find it hard to rank things. As a whole story, I really enjoyed this one. I enjoyed the strong female protagonist. I enjoyed the fact that the male main character never outshined her or overruled her or whatever. The banter between the two of them was really good. I definitely wanted this to be on my honorable mentions list. Next up is The Spell Shop, and this is one of the first more cozy fantasies I read this year. The lower stakes, the cozy setting, the characters, all of it, everything about this book I loved. And it is exactly what I needed during the time that I read it. Something that is in my wheelhouse, which is fantasy, things with magic and, all of these fantastical elements. But in a smaller dose, this kind of solidified the fact that cozy fantasy is something that I really enjoy. I really enjoyed that this year. And moving into 2026, I want to read even more cozy fantasy. Emily Wilde book number 3 was one of the first books that I read this year, and it was my favorite of the series so far. I love how the story ended. I love that the story of the Fae, because of course Emily is a researcher. She's going and she's finding these fairies and she's writing about them. She's looking at this from the perspective of an academic, and I loved how in this one the stories reflected real life, or real life reflected the stories very well. It was like a mirror image of her looking for stories to impact what was actually happening in real time. So I loved how it just went even deeper into like the folklore and things like that. This was, like I said, the best of the series in my opinion. Next up is Tusk Love. This is one that I just read a few months ago, actually. And this, again, falls in that cozy fantasy area. And I really enjoyed this. I also like the whole aspect of it's a book that exists in the Dungeons and Dragons universe, like this game that people created. There's this book and the characters talk about the book and they've read the book or whatever, and then somebody actually like wrote the book. I thought that was such a fun concept, and the story itself, the writing, it was done so well. I actually tabbed this book, and I don't tab or annotate books very often, but quotes like this. He wanted to tell her once again to quit trusting people so quickly, but not as much as he wanted to fold her trust into a pocket in his heart and spend the rest of his life proving himself worthy of it. I loved this. It was just darling, and I loved it. Of course, I have to mention Zom Rom-Com. I cannot recommend this book enough if you like rom-coms, if you like humor in your books, in your romance, also mixed with a zombie apocalypse story. I was so shocked at how much I loved this book. I almost didn't buy this book because I didn't think it was going to be for me. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it had a great balance of humor, and the stakes were high enough. At the end of this book, I actually cried a little bit. So I definitely would say that I became attached to the characters as well. And I definitely think if you have not read this book yet, you should read it, because it was just a fun time. Next up is The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love, which is, again, one of those cozy fantasy books that I really enjoyed this year. And again, this one, the humor was what I think I enjoyed so much about this, because it was just so fun to read. I am just really enjoying this kind of like historical, academic, cozy fantasy, and I definitely want to read more of that in 2026. And my last honorable mention is kind of more of the same. So that historical, cozy, fantasy, academic vibe. This was one of my favorites in that kind of genre this year. I enjoyed the like mummy vibes that it had, like the Indiana Jones vibes, but then also it still had the humor in it as well. And the rest of the books in this series are a priority read for me in 2026. Okay, so that brings me to my actual top 10 books for 2025. At number 10, I put Hemlock and Silver. This, as I've said before, is my new favorite T. Kingfisher, and I'm sure as I read more in 2026, I'm going to find another one probably to replace it, but in general, I like T. Kingfisher's fairy tale retellings. I love that she puts that kind of dark gothic spin on it. I love that she has more mature main characters, and yet she gives those main characters a romance storyline, or, you know, some kind of a storyline that you're typically used to seeing with younger protagonists. And she took the elements of the traditional fairy tale, the stepmother, the apple, the magic mirror. She took those elements and she created this whole new imagining of it that was just so unique. And I really did love this one. I think this is probably my favorite use of mirror worlds. That concept or idea of going into a mirror and there being another world, I think is a really interesting one, and I love how she did that in this book. Coming in at number 9 is The Raven Cycle. And yes, the whole entire series is at number 9 because, again, it's a continuous story. So it would be very hard for me to pick which one is my favorite when the story is what I enjoyed. So this is one that I said I probably would have really loved when I was in my paranormal romance phase back in, you know, like the late 2000s. It has those same vibes, but in this one, it talks a lot about psychics. Her entire family is psychic. She's not, but she like amplifies their abilities. Like that's her ability, is that she amplifies for other people. It talks about things like ley lines, there's ghosts, there's, you know, all of these different elements that I just really, really enjoyed. At number 8, I put Quicksilver. I know a lot of people get tired of the romantasy genre in general and the concepts that are in here, but I just thought that it was very well written. I enjoyed the different elements of the story. The labyrinth thing that they do at the end, a labyrinth, is one of like my favorite things to read about. I really enjoyed this one this year. I did not read the sequel yet, but I think I've pretty much decided that I'm going to wait until closer to book 3 to read it, although I definitely can't wait to read it and figure out what happens next. Coming in at number 7 is The Empyrean. I reread books 1 and 2 before the third book was released back in January. Again, this series, I know some people say is overhyped. I really enjoy this. I love how, especially coming through and rereading it, this would be my third reading of Fourth Wing, my second of Iron Flame, and then I've read Onyx Storm for the first time. So when I reread it again, when book 4 comes out, I'm sure that I'm going to pick up the clues and the little breadcrumbs and things that have been left along the way that you don't pick up usually when you go through that first time. And every time I read through there, I find something else. And, you know, on like Instagram and Facebook and things like that, like people's theories of stuff in here, it's one of those series where it's just so interesting to talk about what you think is going to happen next and you know what happens. And the cliffhanger in this last book was so brutal, so I can't wait for book 4 to come out. At number 6, I put The Sunlit Man. This is one of Brandon Sanderson's secret projects. It is a Cosmere novel. This one in particular talks about a character from the Stormlight Archive, and it was really interesting reading through here and getting the clues as to which character it was, and then at the end finding out who it was. I read it before I read Wind and Truth, but I think you should probably read it after Wind and Truth if you are like a you don't want any kind of spoilers kind of person, because it did kind of spoil a little bit because of things that were going on at the end of Wind and Truth. There's this big battle, you know, not everybody is going to make it. So it kind of does tell you somebody that survived, but also I guess if you did read it before and you were reading this one, you'd be like, well, how did they survive and how did they make it? But anyways, I also thought the concept of the sun being so hot that they're constantly traveling in the shadow, like you can't just live in one place on this planet because it will like burn you to death. They're constantly like traveling, so everybody is nomadic. They're on these like floating motorcycle type things, but their vehicles also kind of connect together to make these like buildings where they live. And I thought the whole thing was just very interesting. This is definitely one of Brandon Sanderson's that really ties in the fantasy and sci-fi elements. That brings me to number 5, which is where I put Wind and Truth. I know that some people were disappointed in this as the end of the first arc, but I think that we have to keep in mind for some things that it is the middle of a series. It's the middle book. It does tie up some of the plot threads that have kind of been going on throughout the first 5 books, but it also just kind of left everything hanging. I think it left it in a perfect position to pick up with a second arc at a different time because of where it left the world of Roshar in terms of the general like Cosmere, which is, you know, Brandon Sanderson's universe. I definitely think it's going to be hard to wait for the second arc of the Stormlight Archive, and he's going to be working on other projects, so it's going to be several years before we come back to these characters. If you have not picked up the Stormlight Archive because you are intimidated by the size of the books, that's valid, but if you like big storylines with lots of characters and lots of character growth and, you know, getting into situations where you don't know how the characters are going to get out of it and not knowing who's going to make it, the Stormlight Archive is a really excellent series. Next up at number 4, I put Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. This one is more futuristic. It also is kind of Brandon Sanderson leaning more into a romance storyline, which I thought was really nice. Of course, you know, in Mistborn and Stormlight and all of his other things, like there are romance stories that go throughout the story, but it's not really a main focus. And in this one, the romance was the main focus of the story, but even still, the world building, the way that they use investiture, which is, you know, the like magic system in Brandon Sanderson's universe, it was just so interesting and unique. And the concept of the Nightmare Painter and things like that, I thought this was a really fun and unique story, and I think this would be a good starting point this is one of the good starting points for someone that wants to get into Brandon Sanderson but doesn't really know where to start. This one I think is much more accessible for the general fantasy audience. But it was really good. I loved it. Number 3, I have Tress of the Emerald Sea, and this was my favorite of the standalones for a while, but it got dethroned kind of recently. This one is Brandon Sanderson's answer to The Princess Bride. So the thought of what if, instead of accepting the fact that Wesley was dead and marrying Humperdinck, what if Buttercup had gone off in search of Wesley? And that is this story. So I think my favorite thing about this was the fact that it took like your traditional pirate sailing story and it just put a fantasy spin on it. The fact that the seas are not water, they're spores, was just a typical Brandon Sanderson thing to do. It was very unique. The way that the magic system, the investiture, exists in this world was so interesting. And I think that this is probably the most accessible Brandon Sanderson Cosmere novel. So if you are just a general fantasy reader or even a romantasy reader, this one would be a good starting point to see if you liked the style of writing. My new favorite standalone novel, sitting at number 2, is Isles of the Emberdark. And it may be recency bias, I guess, because I read this one more recently than I read Tress. I loved this one. This one in particular is a very Cosmere aware novel as far as the different characters, the different things that are going on. There are so many Easter eggs in this one, but you don't have to have read all of the other things to enjoy the story. It's a good story. But if you have read everything, you kind of start seeing where he's pulling some of these threads together from his different planets in the Cosmere. He has said that his world is kind of like the Avengers movies. You can watch them independently and separately, or you can kind of watch them all together. And the amount of immersion you want into this world kind of depends on you. But I definitely think that this one was good as far as seeing where all of these threads are kind of starting to come together. And that brings me to my number 1 spot for what I read in 2025. And if you've watched any of my videos since about March, you may have already guessed which book is my favorite book of the year. And that's all 7 books in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. Yes, I'm not going to tell you my favorite because I don't know. I do know that it's not number 1, I guess, because number 1, I gave 4 stars when I first read it, but I was interested enough to keep going. So in this series, of course, you have your main character, Carl, who was outside trying to get his ex-girlfriend's cat, Princess Donut, to come back inside. It's, December, middle of winter, it's freezing. And all of a sudden, all of the buildings just kind of sink down into the earth and get rearranged and create what's known as the dungeon. And anybody that was inside at the time is now dead. But anybody that was outside is given the opportunity to enter the dungeon and basically enter this intergalactic game show. And of course, Carl goes, and Princess Donut, his girlfriend's cat, goes with him. And they become a team that is like traveling through this dungeon. And so the way that it works is that they have to fight each other, different monsters and bosses and all of these things, and they get to advance levels. At first, I thought that this series was not going to be for me. I've never read lit RPG before, and it was definitely something that was out of my wheelhouse. But because so many people were reading it and talking about how good it was, I gave it a try. And I think that the combination of things makes this a book, or a book series rather, that I I really enjoy. First and foremost, Matt Denneman does an amazing job with characters and character development and things like that. By book 3, I was crying over these characters because, yes, it's silly and it's ridiculous and it's hilarious. The humor in here is over the top crazy. But you just get to know these characters so well and you become so attached to them that, you know, by book 7, I was almost dreading reading it because I was like, I don't know what characters are going to make it. And then at the same time, you have this almost like a revolution that is happening because, you know, your main character, Carl, is seeing these people entering the dungeon and having zero issues killing each other for survival. And of course, he has an issue with this, and he takes offense at the fact that these people have come in and they've invaded our planet and they're making people fight for survival. But not only that, they're televising it for the whole universe. And just the injustice of all of it pushes him to the point where he is going to do whatever it takes to tear this thing down. And I really love a good revolution story. And I think that this is probably one of the best that I've read. That is it for my best books of 2025. So now we need to talk about the worst books of 2025. So for my least favorite reads, these were all 2.5 stars and below. And they're kind of in order from like my 2.5s, which were like just, I didn't like them, but they weren't like horrible or anything, all the way down to the worst book I ever read in my whole entire life, at book number 1 at the bottom spot. So I'm going to start with Mutts and Mistletoe. This was an okay book. There were funny parts in it. At one point, the female main character, her cousin runs like a doggy daycare kind of situation, and she went to one of the little suites and there was a dog hamster wheel, and of course she gets on it and starts walking even though she's got a concussion and everything. Of course she fell and hit her head. So there were like humorous parts in it, although that was like cringy more so than funny. But my biggest issue with this book is, first of all, the male main character was never really likable. He was very standoffish and cold to her pretty much the whole entire time. But the chemistry between the characters, like her and the guy that ended up becoming her friend, had better chemistry than her and the male main character, like throughout the whole entire book. Like if you're writing a romance, your two main characters have to have good chemistry, and they just didn't. And I just didn't really like that one. Next is Blessed Are the Cheesemakers. This was, again, like a 2.5. If you wanted a book where the main character was just kind of focused on herself and her relationship with people and her faith and all of that, then it was kind of like a 3-star. If you were reading it because of the mystery aspect of it, it was a 2-star. Out of 100% of this book, I would say 70 to 80% of it was her and like how she was dealing with other people and how other people felt. Like that was 70 to 80% of the book. Whereas the actual like mystery parts were just kind of like sprinkled in throughout. And I just didn't like that. Also, the book just felt very preachy. Whenever she was talking to her aunt, who she's like running this business that's her aunt's business. Her aunt left to be like a missionary or something, and she's talking to her about the cheese chalet where they make this cheese. It burned down, and at the time they assumed that it killed their cheese cultures, meaning they can't make the cheese anymore, which would totally not only destroy their livelihood, but all of these farms where they supply the milk, it would destroy their livelihoods as well. And her mom is just like, or her aunt is just like, well, you know, Jesus overcame the world, and so if he can do that, then we can, you know, overcome anything. And it's like, yeah, that's fine, that's great, but it wouldn't hurt you to just admit that, yeah, that sucks for these people. That's really sad, and that's going to create like devastation in this community. Like, it's okay to admit that. Just, it ended up making the whole book just very awkward and clunky. Next up, I have Visions of Sugar Plums, which I gave 2 stars, mostly because I just didn't know what the fuck was going on in this book. Okay, so first you have what is her name? Stephanie Plum, who is like a bounty hunter type person. I guess that's what she does. Yeah, she's a fugitive apprehensive agent. And she is going to go find somebody. Very realistic, everyday world situation. All of a sudden, this guy shows up in her kitchen, and by all of a sudden shows up, like he just zapped there, like by magic. Because he is a superhuman. And he also catches fugitives, but they're superhuman fugitives. So, like, he's after a character that can, like, zap people with lightning. And so I wasn't sure at multiple points in the book, like, is this supposed to be real? Was it supposed to be, like, magical? It was both, apparently. And I've never read any of, there's, like, 2 series, and it's, like, meshing in these, like, little in-between novels. I've never read either of them, so I Googled it at the end to even understand, you know, what was even going on with that. Also, at one point, it talked about her, like, boyfriend. When they were kids, they would, like, play trains. And then it said, like, when they were teenagers, they played a more grown-up version of it. And I realized that it probably was, like, a innocent thing when they were children and, like, a not-so-innocent thing when they were teenagers. But the way that it read just made me very uncomfortable that this, like, kid forced this other kid to do things. And I don't know, just that one was not for me. Next up was Trick or Treat Murder, and this one I just gave 2 stars because as someone that likes cozy mysteries, this one just did not do anything for me. It did not have like the memorable cast of characters that you want to go back and read more about. Her really and truly, she was this way to herself, but her best friend especially was just constantly on her about not eating things because she was fat and the baby weight because she had just had a baby. But then, like at the end of the book, and they're going to like a Halloween party or whatever, she puts on her 11-year-old son's baseball uniform, and it fits her. And of course, it's a little tight, especially in the chest area because she's breastfeeding. But like, how can you be fat if you can wear 11-year-old kids' clothes? That makes no sense. And then the fact that at the end of the book, she accidentally gets caught in a fire. And she still doesn't know who did it until the person is actually admits to doing it. Even though, like, you realize at a certain point that it's this character and there's, like, this stuff that you're like, dude, how have you not realized that it's this person until finally the person's like, yeah, I did it, and I'm going to kill you too. Okay. Next up, I have A River of Golden Bones. My biggest issue with this book is it says that it's like a cross between Sleeping Beauty and Howl's Moving Castle. And the Sleeping Beauty aspect of it, kind of, yes, there is a character that kind of gets put to sleep. The Sleeping Beauty story is really and truly more of like her parents' story, because like her mom was asleep or whatever and her dad woke her up or something like that. I don't remember. But really and truly, this was an exploration of gender identity, which is fine if that's what you wanted to write or if that's what you wanted to read, go off. But say that. Don't say that it's going to be like Howl's Moving Castle or whatever when it's not. It was just this teenage girl who was trying to find out who she was, and she didn't think that she was a girl, but she didn't necessarily think she was a boy. And so then she meets another character who's like, well, you don't have to be either of those things, you can be, you know, whatever. And she's like, oh yeah, that's me, that's, you know, what I think I am, which is fine. And again, if you want to read a story like that, this one might be one that you would enjoy. But yeah, it just, there was no Howl's Moving Castle vibes. You can't say that it's going to have Howl's Moving Castle vibes and then not deliver it, because that's just a classic book that a lot of people enjoy, and me especially. I love that book, and it did not deliver on that at all. And it came across kind of whiny. Her and the guy that ends up being her mate, that part just, it just had like some cringy aspects to that. It just wasn't for me. Next up is Stranger Danger. This one, the premise of what happened, I kind of liked. The fact that it kind of was jumping timelines, I liked. One of the characters in here, there's a little bit of ambiguity. And I read this in my Summerween vlog, so you can go back and watch as I like figured things out in here. But there was a teacher-student relationship in here, and it was an underage student. And it's one thing for it to be like a college professor and student, which I don't like that vibe. I don't like that setup and situation. But no, this was in high school, and it just totally brushed over that. It At the end of the book, like, it talks about the issue with bullying, and bullying is a big issue, and it was an issue in here because somebody bullied somebody else. It turned into them bullying somebody, which then turned them into bullying them, and it was just like this whole big old cycle of bullying. And at the end, it talks about, what to do if you're being bullied. There's this whole note from the author about being bullied. Where in here does it talk about where to report an adult that initiates, yes, they initiated an inappropriate relationship with a student, a sexual relationship with a minor? There's nothing in here saying that, it's wrong, that shouldn't have happened, you should report that. There's nothing in here about that. So that is the biggest reason why this ended up rating so lowly for me, and why I do not like this book, is because this is a YA book. This was intended for a younger audience, and it just totally skates over the inappropriateness of that relationship. And I felt like that should have been addressed, and it shouldn't be romanticized, and to an extent it kind of was, without coming back and saying like that's wrong. Like, an adult shouldn't be starting a relationship with a minor, and if you are a minor who, an adult has, tried to initiate this with you, you need to report them so that they can go to jail. Yeah. Next up is A Rogue Thorn, and this one was probably my biggest disappointment of this year, because I was so excited to read a Scooby-Doo book and, like, be able to go solve this mystery with the gang. And first of all, the gang solved the mystery completely off page. Like, you were not even aware as the reader of the solving of the mystery. Neither was the main character. The main character, Thorn, the whole entire time is just having this teenage depression episode where she's so sad that the people in her old town turned against her. She had to move, and does the girl that I like me, and my bandmates are mad at me, and just all of this stuff. And it never did give any Scooby-Doo vibes at all. The gang, the characters, Scooby, Shaggy, the whole gang, did not act like themselves. They did not say or do things that they would have done. And with so much material out there with such established characters, it was not that hard to at least make them seem like themselves. You know what I'm saying? And then also the fact that, again, this is a YA book. There were 2 brutal deaths in here. That's not Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo doesn't have, like, brutal deaths in it. Like, one girl got impaled. One guy, like, drove himself into a wall and just, like, splattered everywhere. That's not Scooby-Doo, So, yeah, this was definitely a letdown for me, because I was expecting Scooby, and I got whatever this was. Next up is Magnolia Parks, and this is just a book that I had no business reading, because there was no way I was going to enjoy this. And Alana and I read this one together. We kind of buddy read this one, and we knew it was going to be that way, but we were hoping it would be one of those, like, fun, it's so bad it's good kind of situations, but it wasn't. Like, this whole book was just trauma and toxicity rolled up into a book. The 2 main characters are awful for each other, and I would hope that if I had a daughter, that somebody in her life would tell her, like, no, you don't need to be in that situation. But her whole family just kind of went with it, and they had this kind of, like, on again, off again type thing going on. Like, this was just a hot mess, which, I mean, the family had their own hot mess to deal with. I Googled what happened with the rest of the series, because there was no way I was going to read the rest of the books in this series. And now I have to deal with the fact of what the author did to the, like, one character that I did like in the story. And I'm a firm believer that your trauma shouldn't be an acceptable excuse for you to cause trauma to other people. And that's what these two characters were doing to each other. And I don't think it was healthy. So if you are big into just drama and messiness and toxic relationships, you might like this one. But it was not for me. And then finally, my number one worst book I have ever read in my entire life was this one, Murder in the Monkey Band, I believe it was. This was just one of, no, it was this is the worst written book I have ever read, unless I count some of the writings from my students over the years, maybe, but they're children, so that makes sense. This is just a page from this book. Actually, I'll just read 2 pages because this is good. Marty, I'll be back in a minute. I need to use the bathroom, Laura said. When she was gone, Marty turned to the detective and said, "Of course, what kind of question can I answer for you?" "Well, first of all, I see you're not wearing a wedding ring. May I assume you're not married?" "Yes," Marty said, feeling her face redden. "But what does that have to do with my appraisal?" "Absolutely nothing, but I wanted to find out. I don't know if you're aware of it. Actually, I don't see how you could be. But I feel like there's some kind of an electric spark going back and forth between us. If I'm really out of line, I apologize. This is crazy." "I agree, it's crazy. Let's get back to the appraisal," she said, hoping he didn't see the twitch in her right eyelid, which always happened when she got nervous. "Marty, are you okay?" Jeff said, leaning towards her. "It looks like your right eyelid is twitching." "Yes, I'm fine. It happens sometimes when I'm tired. I've really been concentrating this morning." "I'm sure that's what it is. Nothing to be concerned about." Laura walked back into the room, took one look at Marty, and said, "Marty, what's wrong? Your eyelid's twitching, and it only twitches when you're nervous." And so on and so forth in that vein. Also, her sister's psychic, and she has these feelings about things, and so she was able to find a ring inside a mannequin, like a styrofoam mannequin head or something, because of her feelings. She also knew who did it because she had these feelings. But anyways, that's why that was just the worst book I've ever read in my whole life. It was just very amateurishly written, and it was just not good. So that is it. The best and the worst of 2025, all of my statistics. I hope that 2026 is another great year of reading for all of us. And that is it for this one. I hope to see you in another video soon. Bye, guys.